Pokemon is one of the most wholesome franchises ever created. Colorful creatures, friendly rivals, a world designed to make you smile. So naturally, the internet looked at all of that and said, what if this was actually horrifying? Over the years, fans have written some genuinely unsettling stories buried inside these cheerful games, and today, we're breaking down 6 of the most famous ones. Let's start with the one you've probably already heard of. Lavender Town Syndrome. If you played Pokemon Red or Blue as a kid, you remember the exact moment you walked into Lavender Town. The music shifted from cheerful adventure to something that sounded like it was composed inside a headache. High-pitched, dissonant, piercing tones layered on top of each other in a way that made your Game Boy sound like it was broken. Every other town in the game feels like a Saturday morning cartoon. Lavender Town feels like a funeral home that knows your name. And here's the thing. That unsettling feeling wasn't imaginary. The Lavender Town theme genuinely uses dissonant intervals and shrill high-frequency notes that contrast sharply with the rest of the soundtrack. The track was designed to make you uncomfortable. It's the town with the Pokemon graveyard after all. Game Freak knew exactly what they were doing, but then the internet got hold of it. The creepypasta known as Lavender Town Syndrome claims that shortly after the Japanese release of Pokemon Red and Green in February 1996, at least 200 children between the ages of 7 and 12 died by suicide. All of them had recently reached Lavender Town and listened to its background music. The story claims the original Japanese version contained ultra-high frequency binaural beats that only young ears could perceive, tones that allegedly caused headaches, nosebleeds, insomnia, and eventually suicidal behavior in children across Japan. And none of that happened. But let me explain why people believed it. The story wraps itself in pseudo-scientific language that sounds almost reasonable. It references binaural beats, a real auditory phenomenon. It points out that children can hear higher frequencies than adults, which is also true. It even claims Game Freak quietly lowered the pitch for international releases, implying a corporate cover-up involving hundreds of dead children, which is, not ideal if you're trying to sell a game about collecting cute monsters. But here's where it gets interesting. One popular embellishment involves a spectrogram analysis of the original audio. Someone allegedly ran the track through software and discovered hidden images of Unknown, those letter-shaped Pokemon, spelling out "Leave Now." Creepy, right? Except Unknown didn't exist until Pokemon Gold and Silver in 1999. 3 years after Red and Green, that's like finding a reference to the iPhone in a movie from 1993. It just doesn't work. Debunking efforts have been extensive. Tamashi Hiroka produced an entire video investigating and found exactly 0 reliable sources. No Japanese newspaper articles about mass child suicides. No official statements from Game Freak or Nintendo. Nothing. The only things that are verifiably true are that Lavender Town exists, its music is creepy, and slightly different audio mixes do exist between the Japanese and international versions. That's it. Everything else is fiction dressed up in lab coat language. And honestly, that's what makes this creepypasta so effective. It takes something you genuinely experienced as a kid, that real visceral discomfort from hearing the Lavender Town theme, and retroactively weaponizes it. You felt weird listening to that music, the story just tells you why, and the explanation is terrifying enough that your brain wants it to be true. But if Lavender Town's music is supposedly the most dangerous thing in the game, wait until you hear about what was allegedly hiding at the top of Pokemon Tower. Buried alive. Picture this. You're 10 years old, climbing Pokemon Tower in Lavender Town, and you reach the final floor expecting maybe another rocket grunt. Instead, the game throws a decaying human corpse at you. Not a Pokemon, not a trainer sprite, a rotting human body clawing its way out of the ground, and it wants to battle you like it's just some guy with a Pokeball. That's the premise of the Buried Alive creepypasta, and even knowing it's fake, it still makes me uncomfortable. The story claims that during development of Pokemon Red and Blue, a scrapped boss called the Buried Alive model was programmed for the top floor of Pokemon Tower. It appeared as a decomposing human corpse halfway out of the earth, functioning as a trainer, its party, 2 white hands, a Gengar, and a Mook. Which is, not ideal for a children's game. But here's where it gets disturbing. The creepypasta explains that if you defeated Buried Alive, the game would just crash. No victory fanfare, no Pokeflute. The developers supposedly never programmed a post-defeat sequence because the player was never meant to win. And if you lost, that's when things went completely sideways. Losing the battle triggers a sequence where the corpse crawls toward your character and eats them. The screen cuts to black, 2 words appear in blood red text, "Game over." Not the usual faint screen, not a trip to the Pokemon Center. Your save file gets overwritten, every badge, every Pokemon, every hour grinding your Charizard to level 50, just deleted. The game maps your actual loss onto the in-game death of your character, which is genuinely clever horror writing, even if none of it is real. Now, the white hand connection is my favorite part. In the actual shipped version of Pokemon Red and Blue, there's an NPC in Lavender Town who says something like, there's a white hand on your shoulder. One throwaway line most players missed entirely. The creepypasta writer took that single line and built an entire fictional creature out of it. The White Hands became fully realized entities in Buried Alive's party, spectral appendages that could attack your Pokemon. One weird NPC comment became a whole species of horror. That's genuinely impressive world building from a random internet stranger. Here's the thing though, none of it is real. Full code audits of Pokemon Red and Blue have never turned up any references to Buried or White Hand as internal identifiers. No sprites, no battle scripts, zero evidence that Game Freak ever considered putting a human corpse boss fight in their game about catching cute animals. The technical language in the creepypasta is just window dressing designed to make fiction sound like a leaked developer document. But here's the kicker. Despite being completely debunked, the concept was so compelling that fans actually made it real. Multiple ROM hacks now exist that recreate the Buried Alive encounter as a fully playable battle, complete with the corpse sprite, the White Hand party members, and the custom game over sequence. A story about fake cut content inspired real cut content. I don't know what to tell you. That's just kind of beautiful in a deeply messed up way, and Buried Alive works because it violates the one rule Pokemon never breaks. Every battle is against a wild Pokemon or another trainer. A human corpse functioning as a trainer boss is a tonal violation so jarring that your brain flags it as wrong even within a fictional framework. That dissonance is exactly what makes the story stick in your head 15 years after you first read it on some poorly formatted wiki page at 2 a.m. But if you think a corpse eating your save file is dark, wait until you hear about the creepypasta that turned a completed Pokemon game into a slow, silent meditation on death itself. Lost Silver. Most Pokemon creepypastas try to scare you with blood, or curse files, or some ghost popping out of your screen. Lost Silver doesn't do any of that. Lost Silver makes you feel empty, and that's way worse. The story first appeared on 4chan on June 6, 2010, posted completely anonymously. To this day, nobody knows who wrote it. No one has ever claimed authorship. It just appeared like it crawled out of the internet fully formed, and that's part of what makes it hit different. This isn't some creator's project, it's digital folklore. Somebody wrote one of the most celebrated pieces of Pokemon horror fiction ever made, and then vanished into the void. Which is, kind of poetic given what the story's actually about. Here's the setup. The narrator walks into a GameStop and buys a used copy of Pokemon Silver. Standard stuff, nothing weird. They get home, pop it in, and find a single save file already on the cartridge. The trainer's name is just 3 dots. Not a word, not a name. 3 periods, and the file is completely maxed out. Full Pokedex, all 16 badges, Johto and Kanto both cleared, and 999 hours and 99 minutes of playtime. That's the counter literally maxed. This person caught every single Pokemon, beat every gym, explored every route, and played for over 41 straight days of in-game time. They did everything. But here's where it gets interesting. The narrator opens the party screen and finds 5 Unown and a Cyndaquil. Now, if you remember, Unown are shaped like letters. These 5 spell out a single word, leave. And the Cyndaquil's nickname, Hurry. The game is screaming at you to get out using its own mechanics. No glitchy text boxes, no fourth wall breaks, no I see you nonsense. Just Pokemon nicknames and letter-shaped monsters arranged in a specific order. The warning comes from inside the system. That's what makes it so effective. It doesn't cheat, it plays by the rules of the game and still terrifies you. And then it gets worse. As the narrator keeps exploring, refusing the warnings like any good horror protagonist, the player sprite starts to change. First, the arms disappear. The little character is just walking around armless, like nothing happened. Then, the head goes. Then, the legs. The avatar is literally decaying on screen, piece by piece, and the game keeps going as if this is fine. You're navigating graveyards and empty rooms as a limbless torso, and nobody in the game acknowledges it. The world just keeps existing around your disintegrating body. Cool. That's also a thing that happened. The story ends with the implication that Trainer died. Not in some dramatic boss fight, not saving the world. They just died. Nameless, alone, forgotten, despite having accomplished literally everything the game had to offer. Every badge, every Pokemon, hundreds of hours, and none of it mattered. The save file sits in a used cartridge at GameStop for $3, and whoever was, they're gone. Their name was 3 dots. Nobody will ever know who they were. And that's the real horror of Lost Silver. It's not a monster, it's a question. What's the point of achieving everything if you end up as an anonymous save file that someone else loads up out of curiosity. It's a meditation on completionism, on obsession, on the idea that pouring your entire life into something doesn't protect you from being erased. The 5 own spelling leave aren't just warning the narrator. They're the final message of someone who realized too late that none of it was worth staying for. The story resonated so deeply that fans built an entire standalone fan game from scratch. Not a ROM hack, a full custom executable. You could download it and play through the events yourself, experiencing the unknown warnings, the decaying sprite, the graveyards. A later remake polished it even further, cementing Lost Silver as probably the single most respected Pokemon creepypasta ever written. And the person who created it, still anonymous, still 3 dots. But if you think existential dread is the darkest Pokemon creepypastas get, wait until you see what happens when the horror isn't philosophical. It's personal. Glitchy Red, Dr. Red is the most iconic protagonist in Pokemon history, and he doesn't even talk. He's your silent stand-in, your avatar, the blank canvas you project yourself onto for hundreds of hours across multiple games. He's safe, he's familiar, he's you, and that's exactly why this story works so well. Glitchy Red, preserved on the Creepypasta wiki, follows a narrator who falls asleep one night and has a dream. Not a vague, fuzzy dream you forget by morning. A vivid, detailed nightmare where they are the Fire Red player character, running through the game world in first person, being chased by a white pale figure. A corrupted, glitch-like version of Red himself, their own avatar, hunting them down like prey. The narrator wakes up and writes one line that honestly gives me chills every time I read it. They say they will never again think of the player character as Red. That's it. No dramatic monologue about being scared, no over-the-top description of crying or shaking, just a quiet, permanent psychological break from a character they've known since childhood. The dream didn't just scare them, it rewired how they see the protagonist entirely. But here's where it gets weird. Because the horror doesn't stay in the dream. When the narrator goes back to playing Fire Red, the game itself starts falling apart. Sprites are distorted, text is broken and garbled. And then they encounter an anomalous version of Red that doesn't correspond to any normal in-game event. Not a trainer battle, not a scripted encounter. Just this pale, wrong-looking figure showing up where it absolutely should not be, behaving in ways the game was never programmed to allow. Now, if you've been around Pokemon long enough, you know this pulls from a very real tradition. Missing No, the glitch Pokemon from Generation 1, proved that these games could break in genuinely unsettling ways. Corrupted sprites, scrambled data, entire save files getting eaten. Glitchy Red takes that real history of game corruption and asks a simple question: what if the thing that got corrupted was you? Not your items, not your Pokedex, your character, your identity within the game. And that's what makes this one different from every other haunted cartridge story on this list. Lost Silver traps you in someone else's nightmare save file. Lavender Town Syndrome claims the game hurts you through sound. But Glitchy Red says the horror follows you to sleep, it escapes the screen. It invades your subconscious and sets up camp there, turning the most familiar face in your Pokemon journey into something you can't look at the same way again. The protagonist becomes the antagonist, the hero becomes the monster, and because Red has always been a blank slate, a mirror for the player, what you're really looking at is a corrupted version of yourself chasing you through your own dreams, which is, not ideal. No copy of Pokemon Fire Red has ever displayed the behaviors described in the story. Nobody has encountered a glitchy pale Red stalking them through Pallet Town. And compared to heavyweights like Lavender Town Syndrome or Lost Silver, Glitchy Red is relatively obscure. Most people haven't read it, but the ones who have tend to remember it, because the concept is so clean and so deeply uncomfortable. Every other creepypasta corrupts the game. This one corrupts the player. It takes the boundary between you sitting on your couch and you inside the game and smashes it. The narrator can't escape by turning off the Game Boy because the thing that's wrong isn't in the cartridge anymore. It's in their head. It's a story about corrupted identity, not corrupted data. And honestly, that's scarier than any decaying corpse boss or haunted save file could ever be. But if Glitchy Red blurs the line between game and mind, the next story obliterates the line between game and reality entirely. And it involves an axe. Axe, candle, rope. Every other creepypasta on this list follows roughly the same playbook. A kid finds a cartridge. The cartridge does something it shouldn't. Ghosts appear, sprites distort, the game becomes haunted. You know the formula by now. Axe, candle, rope, throws all of that in the trash. This one isn't about a haunted game, it's about what a game supposedly did to a real person. Hosted on the Some Ordinary Gamers wiki, this creepypasta ditches the ghost story format entirely and adopts something way more unsettling: true crime reporting. The story is framed around a violent attack carried out by a young woman, and the narrative isn't told through glitchy screenshots or corrupted save files. It's told through survivor testimonies, TV news interviews, and the kind of cold, detached media language you'd hear on a 10 o'clock broadcast. Her surviving friends described how she'd become obsessed with her Pokemon game in the weeks before the attack. No, social withdrawal, fixation, the whole checklist you'd expect a news producer to pull out of a segment about media-induced violence. And that's what makes this one hit different. It reads like a suppressed news story, not a ghost story. The title itself refers to 3 items that function on 2 levels simultaneously. In the game, these are standard tools. Axes cut down obstacles, candles illuminate dark caves, ropes let you escape, basic Pokemon fare. But in the context of the story, these same 3 items become real-world instruments used in the attack. The axe becomes a weapon. The candle becomes part of what feels like a ritual. The rope becomes exactly what you think it becomes. This symbolic bridge between game mechanics and violent actions is the entire engine of the story. The creepypasta doesn't need glitched sprites or hidden messages in the code, it just needs you to imagine a person who stopped seeing the difference between what's on the screen and what's in the room. The triad of objects gives the whole thing an almost ceremonial quality, like this wasn't random, but something rehearsed inside the game and then performed outside of it. Here's the thing, this story is doing something none of the other Pokemon creepypastas even attempt. It's weaponizing a real societal fear. The idea that video games cause violence has been a moral panic talking point since the early 90s. Politicians built careers on it. Congressional hearings were dedicated to the question of whether pixels on a screen could turn a kid into a monster. And axe, candle, rope takes that exact anxiety and packages it into a horror story where the answer is yes. The game didn't become haunted, the player did. That's a fundamentally different kind of scary. Lost Silver makes you afraid of a cartridge. Lavender Town makes you afraid of a song. Axe, candle, rope makes you afraid of what a completely normal game might do to a completely normal person under the right circumstances, which is, not ideal. Now, before anyone starts side-eyeing their copy of Pokemon Violet, let me be clear. No mainstream news outlet or official record documents any incident remotely resembling this story. The TV interviews, the survivor quotes, the implied police investigation, all of it is narrative fiction. Some Ordinary Gamers, as a platform, regularly features fictional horror content, and the story sits comfortably within that tradition. The true crime framing is a stylistic choice, not actual journalism. It just happens to be a very effective one, because our brains are wired to trust the format of a news report even when the content is completely fabricated. That's the genius of it. It doesn't ask you to believe in ghosts or cursed cartridges. It asks you to believe that a person could become so absorbed in a game that they lose their grip on reality. And that's a much easier sell, because on some level, you've already heard that argument before. Your mom made it every time she told you to stop playing and go outside. The author understood something most creepypasta writers miss entirely. You don't need the supernatural to create horror, you just need the plausible. A young woman, a Pokemon game, 3 objects, and the implication that nobody saw it coming until it was too late. The fact that it uses Pokemon, one of the most wholesome franchises on Earth, as the catalyst is the dissonance that makes it stick. Nobody writes a true crime creepypasta about Call of Duty because that's too obvious. Pokemon is the unexpected vehicle, and the contrast between catching Pikachu and swinging an axe is what gives the whole thing its disturbing power. But if you thought axe, candle, rope was the darkest place a piece of rope could take us in Pokemon creepypasta lore, the next entry is going to prove you very, very wrong. Rope. So after everything we've covered, all the haunted cartridges and hidden corpse bosses and mass suicide conspiracies, I want to end on something small. Something so minor that most players wouldn't even think twice about it, and honestly, that's exactly what makes it the perfect ending. In Pokemon Red, there's a lone tree sitting at the edge of a field to the right of Vermilion City. It's not part of a forest. It's not next to anything important. It's just a single tree standing by itself, and if you walk up to it and press the action button, you find a hidden escape rope. That's it. That's the whole thing. A rope. In a tree. Alone. Now, under normal circumstances, nobody would care about this. Escape ropes are one of the most common utility items in the entire franchise. You use them to warp out of caves. They're scattered all over the game as hidden pickups. The developers placed this one in a tree because they needed to put it somewhere. There is zero evidence that anyone at Game Freak thought about this placement for more than 3 seconds. But here's the thing. A player on the Bulbagarden forums found this escape rope and posted about it, and the very first thing they mentioned was that they'd been reading a lot of creepypastas lately. They found the rope, looked at the lone tree, and immediately felt something was off. They invited other players to go check it out for themselves, not because it was useful, but because it felt eerie. And once you've read Lavender Town Syndrome, you understand why. The creepypasta describes children dying by hanging. That's one of the primary methods mentioned in the story. Children between 7 and 12 allegedly driven to suicide by the Lavender Town music, so now you've got a rope, hidden inside a lone, isolated tree. Standing by itself in an empty field with nothing around it, the developers meant nothing by it, sending... I want to be absolutely clear about that. This is a convenience item placed in a hidden location to give curious players a small dopamine hit for exploring. The tree is landscape, the rope is inventory, that's all it is, but you can't unsee it, and that right there is the entire thesis of Pokemon creepypasta culture distilled into one tiny, forgettable game detail. Once you've absorbed these stories, once you've read about Lavender Town's suicides and buried alive's decaying corpse, and Lost Silver's limbless trainer wandering through graveyards, your brain starts doing something it can't stop doing. It starts looking for connections. It starts reinterpreting. Every dissonant note in the soundtrack becomes evidence. Every lone tree becomes a gallows. Every item name becomes a clue. Not because the developers intended any of it, but because the community has spent over a decade building a mythology that teaches you to see darkness in the details. Think about what we've covered today. Lavender Town Syndrome took a genuinely creepy piece of music and turned it into a mass casualty event. Buried Alive filled an empty floor in Pokemon Tower with a rotting human corpse. Lost Silver turned a maxed out save file into a meditation on death. Glitchy Red made the hero of the franchise a pale glitching nightmare you can't escape. And then there's this. A rope in a tree. No story attached, no elaborate narrative, just a forum post from someone who found an item and couldn't shake the feeling that it meant something terrible. That's the feedback loop. Creepypastas don't just tell horror stories about Pokemon, they install a lens, and once that lens is in place, you start generating your own horror without anyone writing it for you. The Bulbagarden poster didn't need a 10-page narrative to feel unsettled. They just needed the rope, the tree, and the memory of what they'd read. No major creepypasta centers on the escape rope. There's no lost rope story with thousands of reads, no fan game where your character hangs from a pixelated tree. It exists only as scattered forum posts and quiet thematic connections, just players noticing things and sharing them, which is honestly more unsettling than any polished horror story could be. Because it means the creepypasta effect isn't confined to writers and content creators, it's happening to regular players. People who just wanted to catch Pikachu are now staring at trees and feeling dread. And that's what makes Pokemon the perfect franchise for this kind of horror. The games are bright, colorful, and safe. You're a kid collecting cute monsters and beating gym leaders. Nothing about the core experience is threatening, which is exactly why it works so well as a canvas for darkness. A scary game being scary is expected. A children's game being scary is wrong, and wrong is where creepypastas live. The games haven't changed. You have. The real horror was never in the cartridges or the code or the music. It was in the fact that these stories permanently rewire how you see something you grew up with. You can't go back to seeing Lavender Town as just a spooky level. You can't find an escape rope without wondering why it was there. Not because the developers put something sinister in the game, but because the internet put something sinister in you. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.